Dr. Cassie is a renowned virologist. In addition to saving lives and treating the injured, she also attends academic conferences to share medical findings that could help cure more people. Her boyfriend, Marker, works as an assistant to a senator. After Cassie got into her car, she was startled to find a man sitting in the back seat. Terrified, she quickly asked her boyfriend to call the police, but her mouth was covered before she could continue. At this point, Cassie thought she was being kidnapped. However, the man assured her that he meant no harm. He explained that he had spent a long time trying to find her and that he was running out of time. The man, whose name was James, provided detailed information and a complete profile of Cassie, revealing that he knew everything about her past. He mentioned that in 2015, she would join the CDC's Virus Protection Unit. Cassie was confused since it was currently only 2013 and she was working at a hospital. James, however, insisted that he had no time to explain further as he was searching for someone named Leland. Cassie replied that she had never heard of that name. Just then, as the police began pursuing them, James was forced to take Cassie out of the car and into a building. Cassie realized that if she didn't know Leland, it meant James had arrived earlier than expected. James then revealed that he came from the year 2043, where a plague in 2017 had nearly wiped out all of humanity. The origin of the mysterious virus was linked to a man named Leland. Because of this, James traveled back in time solely to find Leland. Upon hearing this, Cassie naturally thought he was insane. To prove his sanity, James took out a watch, one that was identical to Cassie's because it was, in fact, hers. He then made a scratch on Cassie's current watch, and the same scratch immediately appeared on the watch from the future. James explained that if the past changes, the future changes as well. At this point, James had only 1 minute left before being pulled back to his time. To evade the police, he once again took Cassie and fled the building. However, while surrounded by officers, James was shot and injured. Before disappearing, he told Cassie that if she believed him, she should find him at the Adam Hotel in Philadelphia 2 years later. With that, James vanished right before Cassie's astonished eyes. 2 years later, Cassie went to the Adam Hotel as promised. She waited for an entire week but found no sign of James. Just as she was about to check out, James appeared before her, still bearing the gunshot wound he had received 2 years prior. During his recovery, James had fallen into a coma. In reality, he had also been captured and forced to participate in time travel experiments. The person who captured him was Katerina, the leader of a group of scientists studying time travel in an underground bunker. They injected James with a biological agent during his captivity. The biological agent allowed James's body cells to divide and reorganize, enabling him to travel between the past and the future. However, each journey was an agonizing process. All of this was part of his mission to alter the future. After 3 days in a coma, James finally woke up. By this time, Cassie had come to believe in his identity as a time traveler. Despite his body not being fully recovered, James insisted on starting the search for the source of the epidemic immediately. However, Cassie revealed that she had lost her job because people thought she was crazy over the past 2 years. Her boyfriend Marker had also broken up with her, and she had a lot of unanswered questions. With no other choice, James explained what would happen in the future. In 2017, a pandemic would erupt, resulting in 7 billion deaths worldwide. Only a small fraction of the global population would survive. The virus would continue to mutate, leaving only a very small number of people immune to it. Humanity would face near extinction, plunging the world into chaos. People would resort to doing whatever it took to survive, and social order would collapse. The remaining survivors would retreat underground, but one day, a pair of scientists ventured back to the surface to gather information. Through piecing together clues, they discovered a way to change the future, traveling back in time to prevent the virus's origin. That was why James sought out Cassie. After the pandemic broke out, survivors had turned to the CDC for help. Before her death, Cassie left behind a recording. In it, she revealed the crucial message that the epidemic began with someone named Leland. Although the recording was incomplete, James was mentioned by Cassie in her plea for help. It was Cassie herself who assigned him this mission. However, 2 years had passed, and Cassie still had no idea who Leland was. Determined to find answers, she took James to meet Jeremy, who worked at the National Security Agency. There, they uncovered the reason why Leland couldn't be found. He was using a different surname. On the surface, Leland appeared to be funding vaccine research, but in reality, he was assisting the military in developing biological and chemical weapons. Leland was set to attend a senator's party, where Cassie's ex-boyfriend, Marker, would also be present. While Cassie was busy strategizing on how to confront Leland, James was enjoying the modern-day delicacies. Then, he casually remarked that the simplest solution would be to kill Leland as soon as they found him. James admitted that if the future changed, he would be erased, as his current self would never exist in that altered timeline. Thanks to Cassie's connection with Marker, she managed to get James James into the party smoothly. The two quickly spotted Leland. Just as James was about to strike, Leland's bodyguards intercepted him. As a result, both James and Cassie were swiftly arrested by the police. Hearing James's claim that he came from the future, Leland became intrigued. James's physical condition was examined, and it was discovered that his body structure was different from that of a regular human, with clear traces of future technology. Later, Leland revealed that he had met James before, in 1987. Strangely, James's appearance had remained unchanged in the 28 years since their encounter, looking exactly the same as he had back then. At first, Leland had no idea what was going on. Now, he finally understood that James was indeed a time traveler. James insisted that he had never been to 1987, but Leland claimed that he would go there eventually. According to Leland, James would be searching for the army of the 12 monkeys, who were the true origin of the world's destruction. However, James had no idea who they were at this point. Leland was also baffled as to why James was pursuing him. Just as Leland was about to deal with both James and Cassie, James seized the opportunity to demonstrate what a time paradox was. He took out the two watches belonging to Cassie, and when the two came into contact, it triggered a time paradox. The resulting temporal disruption caused chaos, which James used to his advantage to rescue Cassie from the room. The activation of this spatial temporal phenomenon caused an explosion, leaving Leland severely injured in the aftermath. Taking this chance, James did not hesitate to shoot and kill him. Surprisingly, James did not disappear. This meant that the future was not altered by Leland's death. James returned Cassie's watch to her, and once they were out of immediate danger, urged her to run as far away as possible. After saying this, James disappeared again, traveling back to 2043. With the help of his friend Ramsey, James reported to Katarina that he had completed his mission by killing Leland. Yet, he couldn't understand why nothing had changed. It seemed the true culprit behind the virus's spread was the army of the 12 monkeys, as Leland had mentioned. Meanwhile, in a mental institution in 2015, someone approached Leland's daughter Jennifer to take over her father's legacy. At that moment, Jennifer was drawing a monkey on the wall. In the future, in 2043, Katarina was still intently analyzing the recording left by Cassie. After filtering the audio, Katarina discovered that Cassie had also mentioned the army of the 12 monkeys. This revelation led Katarina to focus her team's efforts on tracing their presence in the past. It didn't take long for them to uncover a clue at a mental institution in 2015. James and Ramsey traveled to the former location of the hospital to investigate. They found that the file for patient 248 was missing. Suddenly, a few attackers ambushed them, but James and Rams managed to deal with the threat easily. They returned to the underground bunker safely, and Katarina confirmed that the army of the 12 monkeys was indeed behind the virus's spread. The group had infiltrated powerful centers in multiple cities. To uncover their true identities, James would need to return to 2015 and investigate patient 248 at the mental institution. Additionally, James had to keep his distance from Cassie to avoid disrupting her timeline. This was crucial to ensure that Cassie would still leave behind the recording in the future. James began the preparation process, including being injected with the biological agent for his time travel back to 2015. However, an unexpected error occurred during this jump. A miscalculation in coordinates sent James to North Korea in 2006. He was immediately captured by the Korean People's Army. Katarina quickly realized the mistake, and while James was being interrogated, she managed to recalibrate the system, successfully transporting him to 2015. Upon arriving, James disguised himself as a mental patient to infiltrate the hospital and began searching for patient 248. To his surprise, it turned out to be Leland's daughter, Jennifer. James immediately pressed her for information about the true identity of the army of the 12 monkeys. However, Jennifer's mental state was unstable, and she spoke in cryptic, nonsensical phrases. She eventually hit the emergency button, summoning doctors to remove James. Amidst their argument, Jennifer suddenly remembered something. She mentioned a place called the Night Room. Meanwhile, her attending doctor reported this conversation to a mysterious figure on the side connected to Cassie. After parting ways with James, Cassie had returned to her old home, determined to investigate clues about the army of the 12 monkeys. She sought out Jeremy for information, only to discover that he had been murdered by a tall, thin man. However, the killer did not harm Cassie, but instead issued a chilling warning for her to stop her inquiries. Terrified, Cassie fled the scene. Back at her home, her ex-boyfriend Marker showed up at her door. He revealed that, through CIA facial recognition systems, James had been identified in North Korea 9 years earlier. Marker speculated that James might be a radical with severe mental instability and informed her that James was currently at a mental institution. Meanwhile, Jennifer sought out James after he had been detained obtained at the hospital. She revealed that her father, Leland, had a secret laboratory known as the Night Room. She also explained why she had been institutionalized. The secrets she knew and her association with her father's controversial work had driven her to the brink of madness. That was because after the group found Jennifer, they massacred her colleagues and framed her for the killings. The leader was a tall, thin man who smelled of lavender and jasmine. Apart from Jennifer, only one other person managed to escape. As James was about to ask about the exact location of the Night Room, a doctor and staff rushed in. James was forced to be transferred to another hospital. While preparing to step into the elevator, Cassie showed up. She pretended to be James's former treating doctor and claimed the right to take him with her. At that moment, James felt that Cassie should no longer get involved in this matter. However, she was incredibly persistent. She then told him about Jeremy being murdered and his body was covered in jasmine petals. Upon hearing this, James remembered what Jennifer had said about the tall, thin man who exuded the scent of jasmine. At that moment, the man arrived to take Jennifer. As he was about to take her away, he encountered James and Cassie. After James chased him, the man revealed that he knew who James was, even showing him the scars on his face that James had caused. Immediately after, the man's henchmen attacked James. As a result, he completely failed to stop them from taking Jennifer. Later, Cassie managed to retrieve Jennifer's file from the hospital. This was also the reason why James could not find it in the future. According to the testimony, the colleague who had escaped with Jennifer was likely the one who knew the location of the secret laboratory. After that, James disappeared again. Upon returning to the future, he immediately reported the situation to the scientists, but Katerina once again warned him not to involve Cassie in this. This led to a heated argument between them. In the end, Katerina compromised. She agreed to let Cassie accompany them in the search for the army of the 12 monkeys. Meanwhile, the tall, thin man who had taken Jennifer prepared a special aromatic tea for her. After Jennifer drank it, she began to hallucinate. At the same time, Cassie received a call from the police asking her to come to the station to assist with the investigation into Jennifer's kidnapping. There, she accidentally learned from the police that Jennifer's colleague who had escaped was a black man named Henry. Moreover, Cassie had actually seen this man before. In 2014, when she was working at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Henry had provided her with medical assistance. Immediately, Cassie went to find a former colleague, hoping to learn Henry's current whereabouts. However, she was told that he had passed away. One day, while going out to fetch medicine, he was shot dead by local thugs. Even though Henry was dead, James did not give up. He planned to travel back in time before Henry's death to learn more about the Night Room. Cassie told James that it was dangerous to follow Henry. It was James himself who had sent Henry out to fetch the medicine, which led to Henry being shot. Cassie said that if James went there, he should stay away from her. When James returned to 2043, he asked Katerina to send him back to 2014. After the scientists learned of the situation, they began debating whether or not to go ahead with this time travel mission. During the argument, Ramsey approached James and handed him a dagger he had found outside, bearing the mark of West 7. This was a symbol of a group of people from the surface, those who were immune from the quarantine zone. When social order collapsed, they began looting everything on the surface. At this moment, Katerina came to see James and agreed to allow him to carry out the time travel mission to 2014, but with several warnings. There would be multiple solar storms that year, which could cause electromagnetic interference. Additionally, he was not to meet Cassie, as it would disrupt her timeline. Cassie would not be waiting for James in the hotel in 2015 to treat his bullet wounds. In 2014, Cassie was on her way to Haiti. Upon reaching the medical station of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Cassie found that the outbreak was far worse than she had imagined. Due to a treatment incident involving a shortage of medical resources, she also met Henry while providing medical assistance. Not long after, James also traveled through time to this point. His goal was to find Henry as soon as possible. However, due to the effects of solar radiation, his time travel state became unstable. Taking advantage of the situation, he faked an illness to sneak into the medical station. Once inside, he found Henry and made up an excuse to drag him away. However, by chance, James became the target of Cassie and her colleagues. To avoid encountering Cassie at this time, James was forced to temporarily flee. It was then that Cassie proposed isolating patient 5 to allow Henry to go out and fetch the medicine. As soon as Henry left the medical station, he immediately caught James's attention. The two ended up in a violent fight, but after a heated battle, James gained control of the situation. However, Henry believed James was one of the people who had attacked their laboratory. James explained his intentions and demanded to know the whereabouts of the Room of the Night. The group hunting Henry called themselves the Army of the 12 Monkeys, and they sought to seize whatever was in the Room of the Night. After After gaining Henry's trust, Henry agreed to retrieve the medicine and bring it back to the medical station first, then tell James about the room of the night. Meanwhile, in 2043, Ramsey was patrolling the surface with the security chief. During his patrol, he encountered a fellow accomplice of the previous intruder. The woman, named Mark, told him she had escaped from the West 7 gang. She wanted to join him at the underground base, but Ramsey wasn't foolish. He handed Mark a knife and instructed her to head to a safe place about 10 miles away where she would be safe. Back in 2014, Cassie was facing an increasingly out-of-control epidemic. She was beginning to believe that what James had said was a forewarning of the world's destruction. She instructed her colleagues to enforce stricter isolation measures. However, her colleagues dismissed her concerns, thinking she was overreacting. While James and Henry were retrieving the medicine, the group led by the tall man arrived. They too were searching for the location of the room of the night. A fierce battle ensued. Though Henry managed to escape, the tall man caught up with him. While the tall man was still trying to figure out the location of the room of the night, James arrived. At that moment, the tall man didn't know who James was. After escaping, James left a scar on the tall man's face. Injured, the tall man temporarily retreated. James was eager to ask about the room of the night, but Henry, with no other option, confessed that he didn't know its location either. Every time he had been taken there in the past, he had been blindfolded, and the room's location was constantly changing. It would never remain in the same place for long. However, Henry did know a way to find it. They had created a device called the Great Burn Mark, which emitted ultraviolet rays. Finding this device could lead them to the room of the night. The origin of the epidemic had finally been traced. It was still manageable, not as hopeless as Cassie had feared. Her colleague, who was also her superior, believed that she was overcomplicating things. As a result, James witnessed from the shadows as Cassie was dismissed from the team. In 2015, Cassie asked James about the whereabouts of Henry. James told her that when they parted ways, he didn't see anyone kill Henry. But the truth was, James feared the army of the 12 monkeys had found Henry again, and it was he who had killed Henry with his own hands. In the future, after Mark escaped from Rams, she immediately returned to the West 7 organization. She told the gang leader, named Deacon, that she had found the location of the underground base. Following the lead about the laboratory device provided by Henry, James managed to locate several spots that could offer a glimpse into the room of the night. To prevent the army of the 12 monkeys from finding it, James was willing to kill all of them without hesitation. Noticing Cassie's hesitation, James told her that the lives of these people were nothing compared to the 7 billion others. Cassie, curious, asked James how he knew everything about her, but she didn't know anything about his past. Before James could respond, he was unexpectedly sent back to the future. Confused, he didn't understand why the shift had happened so abruptly. At this moment, Ramsey mentioned that Mark's appearance was untrustworthy. She had likely tipped off the enemy, and now they had to face the threat posed by the group led by Deacon. In 2032, James had not yet joined the time travel plan. He and Rams were just like the other immune survivors, living in a world that had collapsed. Despite surviving, they had to contend with a harsh and difficult existence. However, they still clung to a fragment of humanity. They couldn't bear to kill a dog when they saw it, even sharing a little food with it. At that time, the two of them were suddenly attacked. Within no time, they were surrounded by a group of people, led by Deacon. Although they killed Deacon's trusted henchman, he wasn't angry. Instead, he tried to recruit them into his gang. Ramsey initially wanted to refuse, but James, realizing the disadvantageous position they were in, decided to agree. The two followed Deacon to the West 7 camp, where they met Mark. The first time Mark met James, she was immediately drawn to him. As both of them joined the gang, they started following the group to loot survivors on the surface. While James adapted to this lifestyle, Ramsey always despised their approach. During one raid, when Ramsey witnessed Deacon kill one of the victims, he couldn't bear it and intervened. Deacon, however, explained that in order to avoid future problems, they had to eliminate potential threats now. Just then, someone attempted to escape, and James immediately shot the fleeing person dead. Afterward, Mark helped James treat his wounds, and they grew closer. But as they were getting intimate, Deacon walked in and interrupted them. It turned out that Deacon was concerned about Ramsey's attitude, fearing it might affect the gang, so he ordered James to kill Ramsey before dawn. However, Deacon underestimated James. In reality, James had never truly submitted to him. Joining the gang was only a means to gather information. After discussing the situation, James and Ramsey decided to escape in the dead of night. When Mark went looking for them, she discovered they had fled. Meanwhile, in the future, the West 7 army launched an assault on the underground shelter's entrance. A fierce battle ensued. Although the defenders successfully repelled the attackers, James realized that the ease with which they were dealt with indicated that this was not the main force of West 7. It seemed like it was just a diversion. Just Just as James was wondering about the situation, a huge explosion rocked the area. It turned out that Deacon had led his men to blow up the entrance to the tunnel and gain access to the interior. Ramsey and Soldier Whitley were assigned to protect the power supply at the central hub of the shelter, while James and Katarina worked together to safeguard the time machine. As James rushed toward the door, he unexpectedly ran into Deacon and his men. After suppressing them with gunfire, they entered the teleportation room and barricaded the door. Meanwhile, Ramsey reached the power center, only to be surrounded by Deacon's men. As Rams bid farewell to James over the radio, James heard a series of gunshots. He wanted to rush to save him, but Katarina stopped him. She wanted to take advantage of this moment to send James back to Cassie permanently. Outside, Deacon's gang began a frantic assault on the door. With no other choice, James reluctantly agreed to Katarina's plan. Just as the West 7 gang broke through the door, James successfully activated the teleportation. However, when he arrived, James realized he hadn't traveled through time at all. Instead, he was teleported outside the bunker. Mark immediately spotted him, and Deacon's group soon followed. It was then that James realized something was wrong. He hadn't traveled to the past, but only back a few days. At this point, Deacon had yet to find the hidden entrance to the shelter. Despite the brutal torture, James gave up no information. Taking advantage of the situation, James tried to convince Mark to join his side. Eventually, Mark decided to rise up against Deacon with James. By this time, Deacon had led his men to the shelter, and James and Mark quickly made their way there. At this point, James knew Deacon's exact plan. He had seen himself and Rams a few days ago, so he had to avoid them. As he led Mark into the bunker, James warned her that Deacon would be coming to the teleportation room, and they had to stop him and save Katarina. Meanwhile, James would go to rescue Ramsey. When James arrived, he found that Ramsey and Whitley were surrounded by enemies. Rams said his farewell to James on the other side, and just after, a barrage of gunfire erupted. When the gunfire ceased, all the enemies around them were wiped out. After finishing the fight, James ran over to embrace Ramsey. But at that moment, another voice, identical to James's, came through the radio. Faced with Whitley's confusion and Rams's concern, James only said he would explain everything later. Meanwhile, Deacon was still attacking the teleportation room door. Mark was there too, but she didn't raise any suspicion from Deacon. When the door was forcefully opened, they unexpectedly saw James before he had been teleported away. Deacon was clearly shocked, thinking this was some high-tech device. While Mark was also surprised, she quickly understood what was happening. She killed the man who had been holding Katarina hostage and aimed her gun at Deacon. Unfortunately, Deacon managed to escape after an explosion. At that moment, James arrived with everyone and helped defeat Deacon's forces completely. Afterward, James and Rams began discussing how to stop Deacon. Since he knew the location of the shelter, it was only a matter of time before he would return. James then traveled back to 2015 to find Cassie. Cassie was curious about where James had been during that time. At this point, Cassie shared her analysis of the location of the night room. Based on the information, they quickly reached the spot. There, they encountered a laboratory worker who seemed extremely nervous when questioned about the lab's location. Soon after, the 12 Monkeys army appeared and subdued James and Cassie. Once they were locked in the surveillance room, they learned that the facility had been taken over. After eliminating the guards, they disabled the alarm system, ensuring that the headquarters wouldn't be alerted about what had happened there. The good news was that the virus was safely contained in the vault, and no one in the facility could open the door. The experimental equipment was large, and the gas used inside was designed to prevent any virus leakage. If the virus was accidentally released, they could trigger the self-destruct button, which would incinerate everything in the lab. However, there were 2 emergency buttons, and they needed to be pressed simultaneously. At that moment, the tall man, along with the worker, arrived at the lab, but since he didn't know the password, he was immediately shot. They were forced to break into the room containing the virus. Back in the future, the team noticed that James' mission hadn't gone as smoothly as expected, as the future remained unchanged. Mark then told Rams that rumors within the West 7 gang suggested Katarina was a bloodthirsty monster. After hearing this, Ramsey began to question whether Katarina could truly be trusted. He secretly snuck into her room and discovered some of her notes and calculations, as well as belongings belonging to a girl named Hannah. After further investigation, Ramsey discovered that many others, before James, had been subjected to the time travel experiments, and all of them had failed without exception. When Katarina returned to the room, she was furious. Under James's questioning, she admitted that others had participated in the experiments, but they had all disappeared through time. All of them had been part of the time travel trials, which were necessary to complete the project. Before James could be prepared for the jump, each testing phase improved the project, but Ramsey felt it was all pointless. It was clear that Katarina had not changed anything, but she still believed the sacrifices were necessary. She argued that even if humans lived for millennia, they could never retrieve everything they had lost. However, Rams was only concerned with James' safety and his return to the past. The tall man believed that Henry had shown James the way into the lab, but sadly, James didn't know the truth. He then told Cassie that James was the one who had shot Henry. After locking both James and Cassie in the surveillance room again, Cassie immediately confronted James, asking why he had killed Henry. Henry. James explained that he had no choice. At that moment, they saw Jennifer locked in the corner of the room. Meanwhile, the tall man's group had successfully opened the virus containment room. It turned out that the room contained the remains of a skeleton carrying the virus. When one of the henchmen reached in to take it, a protective device was triggered. Jennifer was incredibly excited upon seeing this. This was part of her plan. Jennifer had intentionally lured the 12 Monkeys group into the lab to unlock the virus containment room. When the virus source was touched, it triggered a warning system at the group's headquarters. This, however, infuriated the tall man, and he decided to take Jennifer downstairs. Pressured to reveal the password to unlock the virus room, Jennifer insisted that she would only share the secret with James. The tall man, frustrated, told Jennifer that James had killed her father, expecting her to seek revenge on him. To his surprise, Jennifer didn't react with anger, but instead remarked that James had done the right thing. Meanwhile, Cassie noticed the 12 Monkeys group was retreating. She realized that if they couldn't escape the room, it would be a dead end. Jennifer then entered the password to unlock the surveillance room. It turned out she knew all the passwords to the lab. Once the enemies had left, they quickly descended into the underground lab. As they planned to eliminate the virus source, the tall man's group returned. He knew Jennifer would help James destroy the virus, so he had only pretended to retreat. The group began threatening James's life, forcing Jennifer to unlock the protective system. Seeing that the 12 Monkeys group was about to take the virus, James noticed an emergency button behind him. After signaling Cassie, he seized a gun from one of the henchmen and shot through the glass, causing a virus leak. He then pressed the emergency button, and with Jennifer hid in the underground chamber, Cassie, in the control room, activated the emergency system, which started burning the lab to destroy the virus. After the virus had been completely eradicated, James and Jennifer emerged outside. However, at that moment, James sensed that something was wrong. He was supposed to disappear after the virus was destroyed, but he had not. As James and Jennifer pursued Cassie, James realized that his time was running out. Just as they reached the door, he was suddenly transported back to the future. Jennifer stood frozen in place, staring at the spot where James had vanished. When James arrived in the future, he noticed that his surroundings had drastically changed. The underground shelter was now occupied by a group of raiders, and the West 7 gang was surprised by his sudden appearance. They were curious about his identity, but thanks to the mark he had received when he previously joined the gang, James was able to avoid suspicion. He asked about Katarina's whereabouts, only to find out that she no longer recognized him. In fact, she claimed to have never fought with the West 7 gang. Katarina also revealed that her time travel experiments had long since failed. However, James reassured her that she had not failed. He had been transported to a time before the pandemic. To prove this, he showed her the mark on his arm, which she confirmed through a blood test. Katarina discovered that his blood molecules were constantly shifting, jumping between different quantum energy states. Only a self-administered serum could cause such a phenomenon. After hearing James' explanation, Katarina believed that something had altered the timeline. This was why James couldn't return to his original time and space. In this altered timeline, the pandemic had originated in Chechnya in 2015, and the cause and timing of the outbreak were completely different from what James had known. When James mentioned Cassie, Katarina had never heard of her, and there were no recordings left by Cassie. James finally realized what had happened. After querying the historical data, he discovered that Cassie had been murdered in 2015. James realized that this must have occurred after he was transported back, and the 12 Monkeys had killed her. Her death had caused the historical deviation. James knew that in order to correct this, he needed to return to the time machine. However, Katarina informed him that she was no longer in charge here. If he wanted to use the time machine, he would have to meet the leader of West 7. Just then, Whitley entered the room. In this timeline, he had surrendered to Deacon, and unexpectedly, the leader of the gang was Ramsey, who had lost an eye. James was shocked and confused by what had happened to him, and Rams was equally stunned by James' appearance. It turned out that Rams had buried James's body with his own hands, but despite James's claim that he had just stepped out of the time machine, Rams could not believe it. Fortunately, some of their shared memories from the past remained the same in this timeline, which helped Ramsey believe that the person before him was truly his old friend. They then proceeded to the time machine. After talking with Rams, James learned the full story. In this time and space, James had been shot dead by the shelter's guards when the two discovered it. In response, Rams had gone to West 7, killed Deacon at the cost of losing an eye, and from there, he became the leader, leading the gang in a raid to take over the shelter. At this point, Ramsey also revealed that activating the time machine would drain all the energy available in the shelter. Despite being in a difficult position, he decided to support his friend. However, Whitley opposed this decision, not believing the time travel plan would succeed, and shot Katarina. Fortunately, James managed to subdue him in time. Katarina, despite being shot, still managed to activate the time machine for James. After saying goodbye to Rams, James returned to 2015. This time, James arrived a bit earlier than before. He found Cassie's ex-boyfriend, Marker, and told him that she was in danger. However, Marker did not believe what James was saying. Hearing James's words from the future only made him think James was talking nonsense. It wasn't until James mentioned the Trojan operation in Chechnya that Marker believed him. Since Marker worked as an assistant to a senator, he had come across documents about the Trojan operation. After believing what James said, the two rushed to the location of the night room. After some time of surveillance, they saw the 12 Monkeys group taking Cassie outside. James and Jennifer chased after them, but Marker, overwhelmed with worry, accidentally shot James at that moment. That was when James was transported back, which left him with an additional scar. After the 12 Monkeys shot back, they loaded Cassie into a vehicle and fled. Meanwhile, Jennifer, in a state of confusion, was picked up by the corporation staff. Cassie, now captured, was locked in a room where the tall man was speaking with a mysterious woman. Soon, Cassie was brought to meet the mysterious woman, who poured a special fragrant tea into her mouth. Immediately after, Cassie began to experience hallucinations. She found herself walking through a red forest, reaching a wooden house where she saw someone wearing a mask. Meanwhile, James and Marker followed the license plate of the vehicle that had transported Cassie, eventually arriving at this location. At this point, Cassie regained consciousness and, seizing the opportunity, ran away. She happened to encounter James and Marker, who were searching for her. James decided to stay behind to block the pursuers. However, he suddenly felt the call of the time machine from the future and was transported in front of the two of them. Marker was completely stunned as he watched James disappear into thin air. Finally, he believed that James was a time traveler. After being sent back to the future, James found Katerina sitting there, knowing that the future had been restored. After Cassie escaped, everything she had seen in her hallucinations lingered in her mind. The wooden house appeared again, only to vanish once more. In the future, things returned to their original state. While the skeleton, which was the source of the virus, had been destroyed, they had not disappeared, meaning the virus still existed. In another timeline and space, the virus originated from the Trojan operation in Chechnya in 2015. It was highly likely that the virus also originated from there. Leland's group had once assisted the CIA in extracting the genetic modified pathogen from the remaining virus skeleton, which was then used to create a biochemical weapon intended for the Trojan operation in Chechnya. The producers had modified the virus to achieve mass destruction, so they were very confident in its effectiveness. However, the spread of the virus had clearly been underestimated. It was believed that the virus would lose its potency within a few hours. There was no time to reach densely populated areas. The CIA used biological and chemical weapons to eliminate any leaks related to their surveillance operations. An ex-CIA analyst was suspected of leaking sensitive information, so they wanted to eliminate this individual. During James' previous search, a photograph was found featuring the logo of the 12 Monkeys army. The photographer was an archaeology professor. Coincidentally, this professor was about to attend a party, so Cassie took James to the event. James had never tasted such good food in the future, so he decided to try the grilled dish at the party. Meanwhile, Cassie found the professor, who revealed that the head of the animal in the photo came from Chechnya. The logo in the image was a religious symbol, but he had no knowledge that it was the symbol of the 12 Monkeys army. Just then, Marker also happened to show up to find them. He mentioned that the Trojan operation was related to Adam. They quickly deduced that the Central Patrol Bureau was planning to use the virus to kill him. However, the 12 Monkeys army knew the virus would appear there, so they would definitely send someone to retrieve it. After discussing their plan, James disappeared again. When Cassie returned to work at the CDC, she received a call from James, who was now in Chechnya, and the virus was in his hands. Realizing that James was being hunted down, left Cassie very confused. But James said he didn't have time to explain because the Trojan operation had already started. It turned out that 2 hours earlier, James had been transported to Chechnya. The box containing the virus had been located based on intelligence. He followed the courier deep into the forest. However, the courier was shot dead by the 12 Monkeys army. James, undeterred by the danger, grabbed the box and fled. After hiding, he called Cassie. Meanwhile, Marker was meeting with a senator and managed to steal his security keycard. He used it to access intelligence data about the Trojan operation. Just then, he received a call from Cassie, informing him that the operation had begun. Marker was confused upon hearing this. When the two met, they received another call from James, asking about how to destroy the virus currently in his possession. The answer was to use bleach to kill the virus, but in the forest, bleach was hard to come by. Cassie suggested using fire to generate high temperatures to destroy the virus externally. However, at that moment, James was captured by the Chechen forces. There, he met Adam, who was being closely monitored by the CIA. According to Adam, the box was used to transport money, but the CIA suspected that it contained a virus, so they advised against opening it. Despite the warning, Adam stubbornly opened the box, causing the virus to spread into the air. As a result, everyone present was infected. Meanwhile, Cassie and Marker arrived at the central office. They reported that the Trojan operation had been compromised. After being detained by the central office, the senator arrived. Although the senator knew that Marker had used his keycard to steal information, he couldn't do anything about it at the moment. At this point, the CIA arrived to verify what had been said. They needed to know everything about James's activities. After the virus spread, James showed his immunity roll. Meanwhile, those infected around him began to collapse from exhaustion. The remaining people planned to hand Adam over to the Russian military in exchange exchange for the antidote. This led to a shootout, with James using verbal attacks to trigger the fight, causing all the armed members infected with the virus to die. Both James and Adam were wounded in the gunfire. Afterwards, James contacted Cassie to report the current situation. They needed to destroy the area before the Russian army arrived. At that moment, the signal was interrupted. James and Adam then began talking. To James's surprise, Adam also knew about the 12 monkeys. When James tried to ask more about the 12 monkeys, Adam died from blood loss. Afterwards, Cassie was able to contact James again, but he was injured and unable to move. James told Cassie that she would meet him again in a week, but not the James of the present, rather the James from the past. He also hoped she wouldn't tell him anything or try to change anything. James had accepted his death here in order to save the future. At this moment, the central office tracked down James's mobile signal, and immediately, a missile struck, destroying all the areas with virus leaks. Following the agreement with Cassie and Marker, the central office allowed them their freedom, on the condition that they keep all information about their operations confidential. After James was transported 1 week into the future, Marker reminded him, as they had previously agreed, that the Trojan campaign had started a week ago, so James had to go back to 1 week earlier to prevent the virus outbreak. Cassie couldn't bear to be beside him when she heard this, because she knew that this time, James would never return. Yet she could only helplessly cooperate with Marker to continue. When James asked how they would destroy the virus, Cassie told him that what the future James said was to use bleach. As James was about to be transported back, Cassie had so many things she wanted to say, but all she could do was say goodbye. No matter how reluctant she was, she had to accept this permanent farewell. In the future, Katerina was trying to transport James back, but the energy center had been destabilized after the earlier attack, causing the machine to malfunction. Katerina had no other choice but to terminate the connection. After checking, she found that the stabilizer was damaged beyond repair. Whitley was tasked with going to the Spearhead area to borrow a stabilizer, and Ramsey would accompany him. Spearhead, once a symbol of hope, had been a place where top government officials and experts were sent after the outbreak of the virus. However, as the virus mutated, the government officials abandoned the location. At this moment, Colonel Potter stubbornly stayed behind. After his wife died from the virus, he became paranoid, obsessed with finding a cure for the virus. As a result, he launched a coup and seized control of Spearhead. At that time, Katerina had already left the area. There were 2 energy centers, and she took one with her. After the team arrived at the location, Ramsey learned that the head of the security team there was Whitley's father. He then took them to meet a scientist named Jonathan. They explained to Jonathan that the time travel plan had been successful, but now there was a small issue. They needed to borrow a stabilizer. Upon hearing this, Jonathan showed them the data center and even mentioned that the virus vaccine was nearly ready for release. At this moment, Ramsey unexpectedly ran into his ex-girlfriend. Both of them had thought the other had died, but it turned out they had met again in this place. However, the most surprising part was that Elena had a 5-year-old son now. On the other side, Katerina could no longer wait any longer. Despite the ongoing malfunction, she was forced to restart the time machine. As a result, it backfired and completely damaged the energy center. Katerina had no choice but to personally go to Spearhead, but this time, it wasn't just to borrow a stabilizer. She needed to take the entire energy center. Jonathan agreed to lend it to her, but on the condition that she would cooperate with him in developing the vaccine in the future. Of course, Katerina refused. The 2 of them had always had differing ideas, and no matter how much they argued, neither could convince the other. In the end, they parted ways under poor conditions. Cassie had always wondered whether James was still alive. According to the senator, his body was never found, so she managed to convince him to go to Chechnya to confirm the situation. Cassie then went to the Chechnya base alone. With the ruins bombed in front of her, she believed there were no survivors. Perhaps James had been erased from time after saving the future. However, he hadn't disappeared after all. Katerina failed to send James back to 2043, but managed to bring him to 2017. However, upon his rescue, he discovered that the virus had already spread, and the pandemic had erupted across the world. Quarantine zones were established, and James followed the panicked crowd, trying to escape, but the military seemed to be searching for him. After noticing the markings on his body, he was captured and placed into a car. Someone had arranged for him to be taken to the United States. Upon his arrival in America, the situation was just as dire. The virus was completely out of control, and the military escorted James to the CDC, where he discovered that Cassie was the one behind orchestrating everything. So much had happened in the past 2 years. At that moment, Cassie collapsed into his arms, revealing that she had been infected with the virus and wouldn't survive much longer. She wanted to tell James everything, but he knew he could no longer alter the course of time. Suddenly, Cassie handed James a piece of paper with an address that could save him at a crucial time, and that one day, he would find the answers he sought. After saying this, she died in his arms. After Katerina returned to the underground facility, she decided to use force to seize control of Spearhead's energy center, while also brainwashing everyone before taking action. She explained that the virus had mutated a second time in 2033, and the vaccine currently being developed by Jonathan was based on the first virus strain, meaning it would be ineffective. move. Katerina then issued an ultimatum to Jonathan. When he refused to compromise, she immediately opened fire. At that moment, Whitley's father, along with local defense forces, led an assault to take control of the area. Unfortunately, Whitley's father was shot and killed by the resistance. Shortly after, the defense forces killed all the remaining opposition. Katerina's plan successfully secured the energy center, but she discovered that the vaccine research had indeed succeeded. Jonathan had found a cure for the 2033 virus strain. Katerina, however, burned all the research results, showing no concern for whether the virus could be cured. What she truly wanted was for the time travel plan to succeed, so she could change the past and save her daughter, Hannah. Soon after, the time machine was restarted. While James was still mourning Cassie's death, he was transported once again. After James returned, Ramsey immediately sought him out. Before that, Rams had rescued his girlfriend and their son, and he had learned the truth about the vaccine from her. Rams was furious about the Spearhead massacre carried out by Katerina, but James felt that Katerina was simply doing what she had to do. After Cassie's death, James became even more determined to change the past. After a futile argument, the two decided to part ways. In 2015, Cassie confirmed that James had disappeared, leading her to believe that the epidemic had been successfully prevented. Without the looming threat of the apocalypse, Cassie and Marker reconciled their relationship. However, just as things seemed to calm down, James walked through the door, signaling that everything was far from over. But his return did not bring joy to Marker. After some deduction, James and Cassie suspected that the person responsible for spreading the virus was likely the same person who created it. When they found the person's house, they discovered a corpse, surrounded by scattered flower petals. Luckily, the deceased was not the creator of the virus. They also found notes detailing the virus formula and the remaining skeleton, which outlined the origin of the virus in Pwoth. The virus was discovered in the Himalayan range during the 1980s, and a place called the White Dragon in Tokyo in 1987. James immediately recalled what Adam had said before his death, and Leland had also mentioned meeting James in 1987. There had to be some connection to that year. After James was sent back to the future, Cassie and Marker tracked down the whereabouts of the virus's creator. After splitting up, Cassie found the person who first discovered the virus. He revealed that the 12 monkeys had forced him to create the virus from the original sample. Meanwhile, Marker coincidentally encountered a mysterious woman who, in their conversation, stated that she would take Cassie's life. In the future, Rams had stolen all the biological syringes for time travel and then burned all the research documents related to this project. The reason he did this was to prevent James from traveling through time again, because once the epidemic ended, he and his lover would never meet again, and their son would never be born. After ensuring his wife and son were safe, Ramsey observed the situation outside. He noticed someone on guard, and on a vehicle, he saw the symbol of the 12 monkeys. When James returned to the future, he realized that all the information he had gathered had been destroyed by Ramsey. James planned to travel back to 1987, but was unsuccessful once again. Katerina insisted that he rest for the time being, and also ordered Whitley to track down Rams. That evening, Whitley took advantage of the darkness to infiltrate the camp of the previous group. Ramsey had seen the symbol of the monkey before, and was curious about the connection between the monkey squad and the 12 monkeys. At that moment, the leader of the monkey squad emerged, revealing herself to be Jennifer from the future. She told Rams that James couldn't reverse the future, and then she handed him a necklace, telling him that he still had a mission to complete. What happened today would change his fate. Meanwhile, Whitley led a group of people into the area where Rams had settled. An unexpected accident occurred, resulting in Elena being shot and killed. Although Whitley brought the shooter to justice on the spot, the one who died could not come back. When Ramsey returned, he found Elena was already a lifeless body. After handing his son over to the people in the camp, Rams went down to the basement alone. Initially, he wanted to shoot Katerina to stop the time travel plan, but she was saved by Mark. However, she was later shot and died in front of James. At this point, Rams injected himself with the drug and used the time machine. The machine, which had previously been used to support James's time travel to 1987, was not synchronized with Ramsey, so there was no tracking signal, and they could not send him back. James's health temporarily improved after treatment, and 1987 was the final opportunity. Whether it succeeded or failed depended on this moment. In 1987, Ramsey arrived in Tokyo, Japan. While still dazed, James followed him there. However, Rams quickly ran away from James. At this point, in a nightclub in Tokyo called White Dragon, a younger Leland had made deals with people. The skeleton containing the virus remnants was frozen here. Later, James approached Leland when he was alone, asking about the 12 monkeys, but Leland had no knowledge of it. While James was trying to convince him to destroy the virus, Ramsey suddenly appeared. The two immediately engaged in a struggle, and as a result, Ramsey stabbed a knife into James's stomach. After Rams was taken away, James warned Leland that the 12 monkeys would destroy the world. However, Leland was uninterested and ordered someone to handle James. Meanwhile, Rams was imprisoned following the incident. While in jail, he received a mysterious letter from someone who had known of his existence for a long time, promising to protect his son in the future on the condition that he join them. The mysterious woman woman then took him out of prison, where a tall, thin man was waiting for Ramsey's arrival. He also had a necklace, similar to the one Jennifer from the future had given Ramsey. After the mysterious woman removed their necklaces, everyone was awaiting something. At that point, Ramsey was taken to the middle of a swimming pool, and then the two necklaces were brought close together to activate a time paradox. As a result of the paradox, the surrounding trees gradually began to turn red. The scene of the red forest finally appeared, and it seemed that Rams was the legendary witness. Under his guidance, the mysterious woman invested in Leland's group, and it was he who planned a series of time travel events for James. The goal was to ensure Rams's appearance, so he always stayed ahead of James. However, in Rams's memory, James had died in 1987 during his last time travel. The next task was to spread the virus, but at that time, James had not been executed yet. Katarina had tracked his signal, but instead of sending him back to the future, she decided to transport James to 2015, just before he was killed. The time travel was successful, and he returned to meet Cassie. He told her that Rams was the mastermind behind everything. James had been severely injured earlier, and the side effects of multiple time jumps had almost taken his life. To save him, Cassie sought out a young Katarina to help. At first, Katarina didn't believe what Cassie said, until she saw her own unpublished research results. Finally, she believed that James came from the future, and wondered how Cassie managed to find young Katarina. It turned out to be the address on the note that Cassie had asked James to carry with him in 2017 before her death. James was also confused when he saw Katarina, realizing she had met him when she was younger. That's when she had chosen him to be the time traveler for her project in the future. After studying James's blood, it became clear that he was on the brink of death. When Katarina learned that James was born in 2009, she found a way to save him. The multiple time jumps had disrupted James's movement sequence, but by combining his original genes, she believed she could help him return to normal. However, Marker was not happy about James's appearance, and he reported James's location to the mysterious woman. Meanwhile, Katarina and Cassie managed to find young James. They first tried to tell his father the truth, but unsurprisingly, he didn't believe anything they said. When Cassie mentioned the army of the 12 monkeys, James's father actually recognized it. It turned out that James's mother had mentioned it to him before. When they went to meet the grown-up James, his father finally believed that he had traveled through time. After Cassie took young James's blood, she received a call from Marker, and it was then that she realized Marker had betrayed everyone. The tall, thin man and his group arrived, and Cassie quickly rushed back to warn everyone to escape. In an attempt to protect them, James's father was shot dead. When the tall, thin man entered the house, preparing to kill James, he injected the blood from James's younger self into his body. The time paradox was immediately triggered inside James, and a miraculous event occurred that caused his body to levitate. Then a massive explosion rocked the building. After the explosion, James appeared naked, seemingly reborn. Cassie returned and helped him escape from there. Young James was sent to Child Protection Services. Afterward, Katarina said her goodbyes to the two of them. Meanwhile, young James met his friend Ramsey at the facility. In the future, a red branch appeared on the time machine. Research revealed that these branches didn't belong to this era. Meanwhile, the underground bunker was attacked by 12 pale-faced men, with Dacon of the West 7 gang helping them. He allied with those from the old Spearhead base, releasing countless crows into the sky. The crows launched an assault on the bunker. After disabling the bunker's power, they began making their way underground, where a fierce battle ensued, and the bunker was eventually overtaken. Soon after, they found the teleportation room. Katarina realized that the bunker could no longer be defended, so she attached a bomb to the time machine. She knew the 12 men had come to seize the machine, so she allowed others in the bunker to leave in order to complete the deal. At this time, James discovered that Marker had betrayed them. Under torture, Marker revealed the mastermind behind everything, the mysterious woman who had invested in Leland's company. After Marker escaped and fled, he attempted to set James on fire while being chased. However, he inadvertently caused a fire that consumed him. Meanwhile, Cassie learned about the new CEO of the Lepin Corporation, Jennifer, who had officially taken over her father's business. After hearing her speech, they realized she was still talking nonsense as usual. They eventually learned the identity of the investor from her. It was none other than Ramps. In addition to helping the mysterious woman plan various actions, Ramps also funded the development of the time machine, with the goal of traveling to the future. The leaves from before were sent to the future. This was the time machine he was working on. As the investor, Ramsey could use the machine whenever he wanted. The director had prepared enough biological agents for him, as he was the ex-husband of Katarina. At this time, James and Cassie had located the lab. The two quickly split up to find the time machine as soon as possible. Cassie entered a room and discovered it was filled with red plants, a mesmerizing scene that triggered memories in her mind. Meanwhile, James found the time machine. Ramsey was shocked to see that James was still alive, but he didn't shy away from his intentions. Everything Ramsey had done over the years was for the purpose of returning to the future with his son. Even if 7 billion people had to sacrifice for this, Ramsey wouldn't hesitate. At that moment, Cassie arrived. She believed Ramsey was the cause of everything. As soon as she fired, Ramsey's and James' bodyguards also shot. As a result, Cassie was severely severely wounded. Rams suggested sending her to Katerina, believing that was the only way she could be saved. With no other option, James injected Cassie with a serum and sent her into the time machine. After activating the time machine, she was transported to the future. At this moment, Ramsey entrusted James with finding his son, so James made a promise to Rams and turned to leave. Meanwhile, the mysterious woman selected 12 healthy boys to begin the next cycle, and they would become the 12 monkeys. Their role in the future would be to ensure the previous time loop was completed, closing the loop. In reality, Rams was not the true witness. The mysterious woman was the real manipulator. After James left, an idea suddenly came to him. He hurried back to rescue Rams. In the future, the 12 monkeys believed everything was in order, but then the time machine unexpectedly activated itself, bringing Cassie back to this point. In the past, the virus outbreak had been prepared by Jennifer. She was set to spread the virus to 12 cities worldwide. This concluded part 1 of the movie. Thank you all for following along, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.